It started like any other ordinary afternoon. A quiet suburban home. A mother coming back from the grocery store. But what she discovered inside would shatter the thin veil of normalcy that held her life together. No laughter. No tiny footsteps running to greet her. Just silence. And then a knock. A knock coming from the freezer. This isn't just a story about a missing child. It's about how the unimaginable can hide in plain sight, and how one mother's worst nightmare came wrapped in frost and steel. It was 4:12 p.m. on a Thursday when Sarah Belmont pulled into the driveway of her modest two-story home in Crestwood Heights. A quiet, friendly neighborhood tucked just outside of Denver. The trees were beginning to turn, painting the streets in shades of amber and rust. She had just returned from the supermarket, arms aching with reusable bags filled with snacks, juice boxes, and dinner for the night. Her routine was automatic. She opened the front door with her shoulder, expecting to hear the usual chaos. Her 6-year-old twins, Chloe and Max, arguing over the television remote or building chaotic Lego cities in the living room. But the house was still. Too still. "Chloe? Max?" she called out, setting the bags down by the kitchen island. No answer. Her heart skipped, but she brushed it off. Maybe they were napping, or hiding. Chloe loved playing hide and seek. But something about the air, thick, quiet, and heavy, felt wrong. She checked the living room first. Cushions were strewn across the floor, and Max's favorite plush dinosaur lay face down on the couch. The TV was off. Unusual. The twins never left the TV off. She moved upstairs. Their bedroom door was wide open. The beds untouched, the window cracked slightly open, curtains fluttering in the autumn breeze. She looked around, more alert now. "Kids, this isn't funny," she said, her voice rising, inching toward panic. She searched every room. The bathroom, the master bedroom, even the attic ladder she hadn't touched in months. Empty. No sign of them. Just eerie stillness, as though the house itself was holding its breath. She grabbed her phone and dialed her husband, Jason, who was still at work. "They're not here," she said, her voice tight. "They're supposed to be home. I was gone for just 40 minutes. Jason's tone was calm, trying to be rational. "Maybe they wandered to a neighbor's house. Check with Molly across the street. You know how Chloe loves her dog." She sprinted across the street, hair flying, slippers slapping the pavement. Molly hadn't seen them. Neither had the Johnsons next door, nor the mailman who'd just finished his route. That gnawing feeling in Sarah's gut began to bloom into full-blown dread. She returned home, now trembling, and called 911. The police arrived within 10 minutes. They treated it as a possible missing child case, canvassed the area, knocked on doors, and even brought in a K-9 unit. Sarah and Jason were questioned separately. Standard procedure. But Sarah saw the look in the officer's eyes, the same silent fear she felt. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows, no open doors, nothing disturbed except the quiet toys abandoned mid-play. Hours passed. Twilight gave way to a heavy night. The police left around 10 p.m., promising they'd escalate the case to the state level. Jason was in the kitchen, nursing a coffee he hadn't touched. Sarah wandered like a ghost, still hoping to hear giggles from under a bed or a sudden yelp of, "Gotcha!" Instead, she heard nothing. Until just past midnight there was a sound. A dull, rhythmic thump-thump-thump, like fingers or fists, lightly knocking. She froze. It was coming from the garage. The garage was dark. She hadn't stepped inside all day. Her breath fogged in the cool night air as she reached for the light switch. It flickered on, revealing cluttered shelves, boxes of old Halloween decorations, bikes leaning against the wall. And in the corner stood the old deep freezer, a bulky, beige thing they'd inherited from Jason's uncle. It hummed quietly. Another knock, this time louder, from inside the freezer. Her chest tightened. No, couldn't be. She ran across the concrete floor, fumbled with the latch, and threw it open. Inside, crammed between frozen vegetables and boxed chicken nuggets, were Chloe and Max. Their tiny faces were red, frozen tears staining their cheeks. They were breathing barely, wrapped in thin pajamas, limbs stiff but moving. Max was the one who had knocked. His knuckles were raw and pink. She screamed so loud it startled the neighborhood. Jason came running, saw them, and nearly collapsed. Sarah pulled them out, wrapping them in her sweater. Jason dialed 911 again, his hands shaking. The twins were rushed to the hospital. Mild hypothermia, dehydration, but no permanent damage. Doctors said if they'd been in there another hour, they might not have survived. But as the shock wore off, the questions began. How did they end up in the freezer? Who put them there? And why didn't they scream? The kids were quiet for hours, shaken and shivering. Nurses tried to coax answers with juice boxes and gentle voices. It wasn't until the following morning, when Sarah was alone with them, that Chloe finally whispered the words that made her blood run colder than the freezer itself. He told us not to scream, Mommy. He said the cold would keep us quiet. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Who, baby? She asked, gently stroking Chloe's tangled hair. The man in the red shirt. Sarah stared at her daughter, her mind scrambling. There had been no man, no sign of anyone entering the house, no reports of strangers, no footprints in the yard. But Chloe's eyes were wide, haunted, not lying. Max, from his hospital bed, nodded solemnly. He smiled at us. He said we were practice. The word echoed in Sarah's mind like a funeral bell. Practice? She left the hospital in a daze, the kids safe with the nurses. Back at the house, she moved slowly, as if walking through a nightmare. Her gaze kept drifting to the garage. She opened the freezer again, empty now but inspected every inch of it. Scratches lined the inside lid. Little fingernail marks. A small stuffed bear was wedged behind the ice tray. But something else caught her eye, on the outside corner of the freezer. Almost invisible. A faint smudge of red. Fingerprints. And next to them, scratched faintly into the metal, 3 numbers. 092. She blinked. What was that? A code? An apartment number? A date? Before she could process it, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. One word. Next. The text stared back at Sarah like a curse. Next. No sender name. No number. Just that word, cold, final, terrifying. She stood frozen in the garage, phone trembling in her hand. The freezer door remained open, humming as if nothing had ever happened, as if it hadn't been a tomb for her children hours ago. Sarah ran her fingers over the scratched number on the freezer again. 092. What did it mean? She snapped a photo, unsure of what else to do. Her thoughts churned, twisting in on themselves like a storm. Was it a warning? A countdown? A message? She forwarded the message to Jason, then dialed him. It went to voicemail. Back inside the house, she double-checked every lock, every window, turned on every light. She even checked the attic again. Empty. Still, the air felt wrong, like someone had just left, or was watching. The next morning, Sarah didn't sleep. She sat at the edge of her hospital cot while the twins rested. Jason finally showed up just after sunrise, his face pale, his eyes glassy from lack of rest. I got the message, he said quietly. Did you tell the police? I tried. Her voice cracked. They brushed it off, said it was probably a sick prank. But Jason, Chloe saw someone. Max saw him too. Jason rubbed his jaw. The man in the red shirt. Sarah nodded. They said he told them not to scream, that they were practice. Jason's eyebrows twitched. Practice? For what? The kids were discharged later that day, bundled in blankets and ushered home. Officers came to install a temporary security camera system, motion sensors front and back, but there was no forensic evidence. No footprints, no fingerprints, no broken locks. Nothing to support an intruder. That night, Sarah barely slept. The twins had been moved into her room, curled tightly on each side of her in a protective cocoon. But sleep didn't come. Not with the freezer still in the garage. Not with the sound of that knock echoing in her memory. At 2:03 a.m., the camera notification pinged on her phone. Motion detected, backyard. She jumped up, careful not to wake the kids, tiptoed to the living room, pulled up the feed. The figure, in the shadows near the fence. Red shirt. She couldn't see his face. The camera was grainy, but he stood still, too still, not looking at the house, just facing the garage. And then he walked out of frame. By the time police arrived, he was gone. They combed the area. No footprints, no trace. But this time there was something new. Scratched into the wood of the back door, barely visible under the porch light. You found them too early. Sarah vomited on the lawn. The officer took photos, asked the same questions. She repeated the same answers. The next morning, Jason went to work, against Sarah's pleading. I'll be back by 4. Stay inside. Lock everything. No visitors. No deliveries. Sarah nodded, eyes hollow. Chloe and Max were quiet all morning. They didn't fight, didn't play. Just sat close to each other, coloring the same picture for hours. Sarah cleaned, distracted herself, washed every dish, reorganized the pantry, anything to stop her mind from circling that horrible freezer. When she opened the pantry to grab a towel, something fell from the top shelf. A photograph. She hadn't seen it before. It was old, the edges curled and yellowing. Polaroid. She picked it up with trembling hands. It was a picture of her house, taken from the street. The angle was wide, capturing the driveway, the mailbox, the front steps. But in the bottom right corner, blurry but unmistakable, was a red shirt. The man, watching, standing still. On the back of the photo, scrawled in shaky handwriting, were 3 words. Turn. Around. Now. Sarah froze. Her neck tingled. She turned. Nothing. Just the kids sitting at the kitchen table. Silent. Doodling. She checked every door again. Every lock. The house was sealed. She called Jason. Voicemail. This wasn't random anymore. This was targeted. Coordinated. Personal. She opened her laptop, pulled up the browser, and searched the number. 092. Maybe it was a police code, a location, anything. Results were vague. But one link stood out. Case number 092, Colorado Department of Family Services. She clicked it. The page was heavily redacted, but the summary was clear enough. Twin siblings, age 7, found deceased in walk-in freezer at foster home in 2011. Suspect never found. Case remains open. Her vision blurred. Her hands trembled. She clicked again, digging deeper. News articles, blog posts, conspiracy forums. The twins' names were never revealed. But one detail repeated. They had been heard knocking from inside the freezer, too late. And another post, deep in a comment thread, stood out. Red shirt, silent smile, no footsteps. Same guy, different towns. Sarah's stomach dropped. This had happened before. Jason came home that evening to find Sarah surrounded by articles, photos, police reports printed off in a frenzy. This isn't just us, she said, voice shaking. There've been others. Over the years. Always twins. Always freezers. Always a red shirt. Jason sat down, absorbing the chaos around him. But why us? I don't know. But what if we weren't supposed to save them in time? She pulled out the photo again, laid it next to the scratched number, next to the message on her phone. Jason's voice dropped. What if he's escalating? Sarah nodded. What if this wasn't about the kids? That night, Sarah tucked the twins into her bed and sat in the hallway, flashlight in hand. She waited, listened. Hours passed. And then, 3:17 a.m. A knock. Not from the garage. From inside the hall closet. Her breath caught. She stood. The closet where she kept winter coats and cleaning supplies. Slowly, step by step, she approached. The knock came again. Fainter. Rhythmic. She raised her flashlight. The door creaked as she opened it. Empty. But hanging on the hook right at eye level was a single red shirt. Freshly pressed. Neatly folded. With a tag still on it. No brand. Just 3 printed numbers. 093. The shirt hung silently in the closet. Bright crimson. Unwrinkled. As if it had just been ironed. A fresh, chemical smell hung in the air. Industrial detergent mixed with something sharper, more sterile. The kind of scent you'd find in hospitals or morgues. Sarah didn't move. Her flashlight trembled in her grip. She stared at the collar, where a small white tag was stitched into the fabric. 093. Another number. Just like the freezer. Just like the case she found online. She didn't touch it. Couldn't. Jason appeared behind her, rubbing sleep from his eyes. He froze when he saw the shirt. "Was that here before?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. She shook her head. "No. I would have seen it." Jason took a step closer and paused. "Do you hear that?" Sarah held her breath. Faint. So faint it was almost imagined. A slow, steady hum. Not the usual freezer hum. This one was deeper. Mechanical. Coming from beneath the floorboards. By morning, the shirt was sealed in a Ziploc bag in the garage, and Jason was on the phone with a private investigator. The police had grown dismissive, no forced entry, no evidence. It was starting to sound like a case of parental paranoia, but Sarah knew better. She didn't send the kids to school that day. They stayed in bed, eyes wide and quiet. Chloe clung to a plush toy so tightly her knuckles turned white. Max kept glancing at the closet door like it would open on its own. Jason took the day off work and began pulling up floorboards in the hallway where they'd heard the sound. Underneath the hardwood was an old crawl space. Dusty. Undisturbed. But near the corner, where the hallway met the wall to the garage, something was different. A smooth metal hatch set into the dirt. It was bolted shut. Jason tried opening it, but it wouldn't budge. The private investigator arrived that afternoon. A wiry man named Mason North. Ex-cop. Quiet eyes that had seen too much. Sarah gave him everything: photos, screenshots, the red shirt, the news articles. He listened without interruption, jotting notes in a small, leather-bound book. After examining the shirt, he turned to her and said, "This isn't just a break-in. It's a pattern. You were right to call." Sarah's breath caught. "You've seen this before?" Mason nodded slowly. "Twice. Once in New Mexico. Once in Iowa. Always twins. Always the freezer. And always this guy in red." Sarah's voice trembled. "Who is he?" Mason's jaw tensed. "No one knows. He doesn't show up on security footage. No fingerprints. No DNA. But he leaves numbers. Progress markers, maybe. That first case you found? That was code 092. This one." He lifted the red shirt in its evidence bag. "That's 093. Jason looked pale. "You think there'll be a 094? "I don't think he plans to stop," Mason said. "I think he's testing something." Later that night, Sarah sat with Mason at the dining table while Jason read to the kids upstairs. "There's something else," she whispered. "A sound. Beneath the house. A hatch." Mason's expression sharpened. "Show me." They returned to the crawl space. Sarah knelt beside the hatch. "It wasn't here before. We've lived here 6 years." Mason pulled out a small crowbar from his bag. "Help me lift it." Took several minutes and a lot of strain, but eventually, the hatch creaked open. Inside was a square shaft leading straight down, metal-lined, pitch black. The air was frigid, not musty like the rest of the crawl space. Cold. Sterile. Sarah leaned closer. And there it was again. A knock. Not loud. Just one. And then silence. Mason exhaled slowly. "Get your kids out of this house. Now." They packed in minutes. Jason didn't ask questions. They checked into a hotel under a different name while Mason stayed behind to document the hatch. But even in the hotel, Sarah couldn't sleep. Her mind was racing. Why twins? Why freezers? What was the meaning behind these numbers? She logged back into her laptop, searching variations of child abductions with freezers, red shirt intruder, and case code 092. Buried deep on an old message board, she found something. A post from 2013. Username, Cold Witness. It read, "My cousins died in case 089. Twins. They were put in an old ice chest. The cops thought it was the father. But I know the truth. I saw the man. Red shirt, pale eyes. He didn't walk, he glided, like something pretending to be human. I tried to tell them. They said I was traumatized. He's not human. He's not done. Sarah's fingers trembled. What if this wasn't just a serial kidnapper? What if Mason was wrong? What if this thing wasn't human at all? She closed the laptop, her heart pounding. Looked over at the kids, asleep in the double bed beside Jason. She turned off the lights and lay down. At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. Unknown number. She didn't answer. It buzzed again. Then, ping. A photo message. She opened it. The image was grainy like a cheap security cam screenshot. It was the hallway inside the hotel, right outside their room. And there, standing at the door, was the same silhouette. Red shirt, pale eyes. Watching. She bolted up. Checked the locks. Deadbolt secure. Chain still in place. Jason stirred. What's wrong? We have to go. Now. He's here. He sat up, confused. Who's here? Before she could answer. Knock, knock, knock. 3 slow knocks. At the hotel door, Max started crying. Chloe burrowed under the blanket. Jason reached for the lamp. Sarah grabbed her phone. Should I call Mason? Jason stepped toward the door. Maybe it's just a prank. Kids. Sarah screamed. Don't open it. He froze. Something shifted in his face. Fear. He knelt down instead and peered through the peephole. He went still. What? Sarah whispered. He didn't answer. His mouth just dropped open slightly. Jason. Still nothing. Sarah approached slowly, heart in her throat. He turned to her slowly, eyes wide. He smiled at me. Jason stood and reached for the lock. No! Sarah grabbed his arm. What are you doing? Jason blinked, disoriented. I don't know. They called Mason. By the time he arrived 20 minutes later, the hallway was empty. But another photo had appeared on Sarah's phone while they waited. This time it showed the twin school. The playground. Empty. Dawn light rising behind the slide. Under it, scrawled in digital red text. 094 is ready. The photo glowed like an open wound on Sarah's phone screen. The playground. Empty. Drenched in that eerie pre-dawn haze. The caption burned into her eyes. 094 is ready. Sarah gripped the phone so tightly she thought it might crack. Jason stood behind her, arms wrapped around the twins, both children now fully awake and silently crying. Mason sat across the room, lips pursed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We need to move, he said at last, voice low. He's escalating. He's not watching anymore. He's announcing. Sarah shook her head. What does 094 mean? Are my kids part of it? Or is someone else? Mason hesitated, then pulled out his small leather notebook. There was a theory, he began slowly, from a case I followed years ago. A psychologist who studied trauma patterns in children said these weren't just random kidnappings. He flipped a few pages. She believed they were trials, experiments. Each pair of twins was subjected to a different stressor. Heat, isolation, hunger, cold. He paused. Cold was always the final one. Jason's voice was hoarse. Are you saying this man, this thing, is using children for some kind of sick experiment? I'm saying, Mason said, that someone or something is following a process, and your kids might have passed their test too soon. Later that morning, Sarah and Jason packed their things while Mason made arrangements to move them again. Somewhere safer, more remote. As they loaded into the car, Chloe tugged Sarah's sleeve. Mommy? Yes, baby? Chloe pointed at a man across the street, standing perfectly still under a bus stop awning. Why is that man wearing Daddy's shirt? Sarah turned. The man wore red, but this shirt, it was Jason's. The same one he wore the night he left it in the laundry. Same faded collar. Same missing button. Jason stepped out of the car and squinted. That's impossible. The man turned. His face was identical to Jason's. Sarah's stomach turned. Jason grabbed her hand instinctively, pulling her back into the car. The man didn't move, just smiled. A slow, vacant curl of the lips. Then, without blinking, he raised a hand and knocked 3 times on thin air. Knock! 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 They drove for 2 hours, heading north into the hills, to a cabin owned by one of Mason's old contacts. No Wi-Fi, no neighbors, no cameras, just silence and pine trees. "We'll regroup here," Mason said. "I'll see if I can trace that number. Dig deeper into case 092. That evening, Sarah tried to distract the kids with puzzles and board games. But Max kept drawing the same thing over and over, a man-shaped shadow standing behind a freezer, always watching, sometimes with glowing white eyes, sometimes with none. Chloe refused to speak at all. When Jason tucked her in, she whispered, "I hear him again." He paused. "Where, sweetie?" She pointed to the old storage closet in the corner of the room. Jason opened it. Empty. But as he closed the door, he noticed something that hadn't been there before. A tiny red handprint, pressed against the inside panel. That night, Sarah had the dream again. She was standing in the garage. The freezer was gone. In its place, a glass chamber. Inside it, Chloe and Max floated in blue light, their mouths open in silent screams. Behind them stood the man in the red shirt. But this time he spoke. "Test complete," he said in a voice that wasn't a voice. It was mechanical, distorted, echoing through metal. Then he turned to Sarah. "You're next." She woke up screaming. Mason found something the next morning. "There's another one," he said, laying out a news clipping. "Last year, different town. 2 boys, twins. They were rescued, too. Freezer case. Code 091. Sarah studied the article. The parents refused interviews. The children were moved out of state. "No one's heard from them since," Mason added. Jason frowned. "So where are they now?" Mason pulled out a grainy black and white photo. A blurry security cam shot of a hospital hallway. 2 children in patient gowns. One boy turning to look at the camera. And behind him, another boy, identical, wearing the same gown. 3 instead of 2. Sarah recoiled. "Triplets." "No," Mason said. "Clones." Jason scoffed. "That's insane." But Mason didn't laugh. "I used to think it was supernatural. A ghost. A demon. But the patterns, repetition, behavior analysis, control groups, it's clinical. Calculated. Scientific." Sarah whispered, "Are you saying this is a lab? An experiment?" Mason nodded. "We're not dealing with a madman. We're dealing with a program." That night, the freezer came back. Not physically, but in the middle of the living room, as they played cards with the kids, the lights flickered. The room grew cold. And then, without warning, bang, from the front door. Jason jumped. Mason reached for the handgun under his coat. Bang, bang, bang. Sarah stood slowly and walked toward the door, her breath visible in the air now. "No," Mason hissed. "Don't open it." But something inside her felt pulled, compelled, like gravity had shifted. She opened it. No one was there, but sitting on the porch was a small, square box. She picked it up. It was a toy, one of Max's, a plastic fire truck. But carved into the side, deep and jagged, were the numbers 095. "Wait," Jason said. "That's not right. The last one was 093. "No," Mason corrected. "The photo said 094 is ready. That was yesterday." Sarah's hands shook. "Which means 094 already happened. Somewhere else." Jason swallowed. "And this 095 is here." Suddenly, Chloe screamed from the other room. They ran in. Max was gone. The window was wide open. And on the wall, drawn in red crayon, were 3 words. "Return. The sample." The red letters glared on the cracked plaster wall. "Return. The sample." Jason's face went white. Sarah's breath caught. Max was gone. The window was wide open, the cold night air swirling inside the room like a living thing. Sarah dropped to her knees, shaking her head in disbelief. "Max! Max! Where are you?" Her voice cracked. Chloe whimpered, clutching Sarah's jacket. Mason pulled out his phone, dialing frantically. 911. We have a child abduction in progress. Please hurry. The minutes stretched like hours. Sarah and Jason tore through the cabin and surrounding woods, calling Max's name. But the silence was only broken by the rustling leaves and distant owl hoots. When Mason arrived with backup, the search began in earnest. But Sarah's mind was elsewhere, fixated on the phrase scrawled in crayon. Return the sample. What did it mean? Who was demanding a sample? She sat on the porch steps, tears streaming. This can't be real. Jason sat beside her, voice trembling. Maybe it means Max is a test subject, like those other kids. She nodded. A sample for the experiment. And maybe Chloe too. The next day, Mason returned with news. A nearby town reported 2 children missing, twins, just like theirs. Sarah's chest tightened. She realized the scope was much larger. The red shirt entity was a systematic operation, spreading across states, across years. But who and why? Sarah spent sleepless nights researching, piecing together fragments of news reports, missing persons files, and bizarre online accounts. A disturbing pattern emerged. Each disappearance coincided with an outbreak of severe environmental experiments, chemical tests, cold exposure studies, and behavioral conditioning trials. Sarah's heart pounded as she found references to a secretive government program called Project Cryogen. The goal: to create children who could withstand extreme conditions, cold, isolation, sensory deprivation, for future space missions. The red shirt was a field operative, part human, part something else, sent to abduct these children for testing. Suddenly, Sarah received a message on her phone. A video. It was Max. He was inside a glass chamber, suspended in blue liquid, eyes wide but alive. Behind him, the man in the red shirt stood silently, watching. A distorted voice echoed, "Return the sample or lose the rest." Sarah screamed. Jason grabbed her, holding her tightly. They were running out of time. Mason devised a plan. The hatch beneath their old home, the cold crawl space, was the key. It was the entrance to the laboratory where the experiments were conducted. They had to go back. Under cover of night, they returned to the house. The hatch was open. Below, the air was icy, humming with machinery. Sarah's breath frosted as they descended. Inside was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers bathed in eerie blue light. They followed the sound of faint knocks. At the end of a corridor, they found Max's chamber, just as in the video. The man in red stood beside it. Sarah stepped forward. "Take him, but leave us alone." The man's eyes gleamed. "You're part of the experiment, too." Suddenly, the glass cracked. Max floated free. The man in red advanced. But Jason stepped in, shielding Sarah and the kids. The creature howled, half human, half machine, and lunged. There was a violent struggle. But with Sarah's determination and Jason's strength, they managed to break the man's control panel, causing the lab to lose power. The creature staggered, then vanished into the shadows. They fled. Outside, dawn was breaking. Sarah hugged her children tightly. They were safe for now. But she knew the fight wasn't over. The experiment was bigger than any of them imagined. And the red shirt entity was still out there, waiting. Sarah's story became a warning of what happens when humanity plays with forces beyond understanding, of innocence lost in cold, dark experiments, and of a mother's fierce love, strong enough to face even